Live.
Hello? Are we live? I think we did it.
Are we live?
Are we live?
Are we live? Is everyone
I
live?
think that microphone is muted.
No.
Now
Now
we're live.
We did
Hello, we
Yay.
did it.
Hello.
Happy successul Thursday,
Woo.
Pat Gosling.
Goss.
We are here for a very special episode. Our Instagram followers are missing out because our Wi-Fi connection is weak at best. But you folks who are on Facebook, we are going to be talking about porn for the next
Big one.
20 to 25 minutes.
Slash the rest of our lives.
Slash one for live. So buckle in. This is a super special episode because it is Shane's last hot goss.
Aw, we'll miss you.
It'll be a cooler goss.
Aw.
And you will all be hot bosses. And you know I'm just going to be watching from my new job, hiding in the bathroom, being like, it's porn, it's okay.
And you'll have like told all your coworkers about how cool porn actually is, and like they'll be
Someone's
fine
going
with
to
it.
walk into the bathroom, just hear me chuckling.
That's what he likes.
That's
That's Shane
So
looking for
sensitive.
a bathroom
So,
stall.
I will be gossing with all of you and not in hot seats.
But then that means
It's
special
me.
guest. Yeah.
Special guest Olivia,
Olivia.
new executive director.
Yes. Getting increasingly warm. It's
Mhm.
to add to the hot goss.
Mhm. Right.
Yeah. So as you can tell, the wheels are coming off the bus a little bit, so let's like reel it back in and figure out why we're actually talking about porn in the first place. Why are we doing that? Anybody got ideas?
Oh, is it me?
Is it you? I don't know. Is it you?
I don't know. It's been such a crazy week.
What is it?
I mean, I love talking about porn. It's so hush hush. Porn is everywhere, but not everyone's watching it. A study at UNH found that 93% of boys and 62% of girls ages 12 to 18 have seen porn online. In 2017 alone, Pornhub had 81 million viewers. That's bananas.
That's a lot. So,
So-
like, yeah.
Porn is everywhere, and there's a lack of dialogue.
Yeah. And so that's why we're starting it. So not everyone's watching it, but a lot of
A
people
lot of
are.
people.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I was a kid, I was always taught that porn was like dirty and bad and scary. And like the stuff I read online, even when I was researching this episode, was like porn is responsible for cheating and infidelity and even assault. And I'm like, okay, is porn really that bad?
I say like no asterisk, right? So like no, I don't think that porn in and of itself is like fundamentally bad. I think there's a lot of ways that porn can be actually really good, right? So like porn can be a safer way to explore intimacy, right? And to like have like sex and sexuality. Like it can be a cool way of figuring out what are the things you're into, right? Like maybe like what some fantasies or kinks might be. But I think like that being said, like porn can be bad when it's like in a way, or when it's done in a way where it like shows something that's problematic, right? Or like endangers some people or puts a problematic viewpoint at the forefront, right? So if it's doing something that's like fetishizing or is like has like bad power dynamics or things like that, then it can be like a little bit less good, you know, or even downright bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can talk about white capitalist hegemony until the cows come home, but porn, like, literally will. But porn, sort of like everything else in America, is created to make money for a certain class of people.
Mhm.
The people who make decisions, that's usually cis, hetero, white men, right? And so, like, consuming it without thinking critically about that can sort of reinforce some of those norms. It also means it can uphold a lot of those negative stereotypes and behaviors. And it can leave a lot of people out of the conversation. And in leaving them out, it silences those voices and those experiences, and we obviously are not into that as speak about it. So for me, it's more about like thinking about what you're watching and where the problem is, but that doesn't mean that porn is bad. It can be really fun if you're consuming it critically and consensually.
And I think, of course, there's the fear that if young people are watching porn, then they're going to go out and have all the sex.
Mhm.
That's one of the same arguments about distributing condoms. If you give up condoms, people will go use them. I don't know if there's any like stated correlation between watching porn and being more sexually active. We're just trying to give folks more information about critical consuming of porn and having a conversation about what that consumption looks like.
Yeah. You said really interesting earlier that it was like the hysteria comes a lot from like having kids not have the context for like what's on the screen.
Well, we actually, Tina Horn, one of our dear friends, said that we can watch Fast and the Furious and know that it's not driver's ed, but there's no dialogue out there around consuming porn and viewing them as actors.
So it's like a healthy porn education.
Right.
So we're not
Well,
teaching.
and if there's a lack of sex education, porn is often the most accessible sex education for a lot of young people.
That's so true. So then, like, is there are there people who learn important
Yeah, I
things
was gonna
from
say,
porn?
can I jump in?
Yeah.
I think that's actually leading to
Yeah.
my exact point.
Okay.
Is that, yeah, I think like there's a lot of people, like especially young queer folks, who like porn is their sex ed, right? But like for so many people in so many places, like there isn't any sex ed, and then like the sex ed that is there frequently is not queer inclusive in any way. And so for a lot of folks, they're looking at porn and seeing like, oh, this is what my sex looks like, or this is what it should be. Which I mean is good to the extent that like it's nice that they have some sort of representation, but also isn't necessarily like the healthiest place to like be getting your fundamental messaging about sex and sexuality. But like if you're in a desert, you're gonna take water where you can get it. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're talking in this context a lot about free porn,
Yeah.
which we will come back to later.
Like
Yeah.
free mainstream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
oh, Ryan Hammond. Hi Ryan. Thanks for watching.
Hey. I forgot that the camera's like over there. So looping back to this idea that we need more porn education, how do we tell people how to have a healthy way of watching porn? How do we consume it healthily?
I think for me, like consuming porn in a healthy way, like it comes back to like looking really critically at like what it is that you're doing, right? And like I know that we've like said this a couple of times now, and so it sounds like it's like we're like beating a I hate it's not beating a dead horse, but what's wrong?
Okay.
But I think that's like looking at what it is that you have and like know there's a difference between like fantasy and reality, right? And so like you're watching this thing and it can be like really exciting, it can be helpful to like learn about what like the fantasy world is and like what you might be interested in the real world, but knowing that like this is not the real world, right? And like that there is that disconnect, and sometimes they do overlap and sometimes they don't overlap, and just like being aware of that as you're going into it.
Well, I think it's twofold, right? We can talk about healthy ways for us to watch porn and healthy ways to watch porn that's and like who's making the porn.
Gotcha.
Right. So this sort of comes back to I just lost my train of thought.
You were talking about like there's like a healthy way to do it in your own life, but then there's also a healthy way to do it for like people who make it. Is that what
People
you're
who
trying
make
to
it,
say?
yeah. And I think Olivia can probably speak more a little bit to the like personal aspect of the industry, but porn is different.
Words are
There are a lot of different ways. There are a lot of different like styles of porn to watch: short, long,
Yeah.
full length, free, shapes and sizes and colors, and all these different things. And finding something that works for you, and that it's exciting.
Yeah. You have to like navigate that boundary with yourself in a way,
Yeah.
which is like what we tell people when we talk about sex too.
Yeah. I think one of the things it's the same like rules around consent and like engagement as it is in any other form of sexual encounter, right? Like it's about ethics, it's about your personal ethics and thinking about how they impact the other people involved, not just the folks you might be watching with, but the folks who are making it. Whether they're actors or amateurs, because amateur porn is a thing. And it's kind of like drinking fair trade coffee, right? Like you choose for yourself whether you want to engage, how your ethics dictate your consumption. So like you might care a lot about like the growers and the means of production, et cetera, or you might be like, I just need a $1 cup of coffee right now, right? Like we're not telling you how to make those choices, but we are opening up for the fact that like because it is the means of production, it is possible to harm folks along the way, right? And so consumption can be participation in that. And I'm not an expert in the industry. There are a lot of like folks who make porn from multiple different sides, whether they're writing or directing or starring, who have written a lot more about like the studios they like to work with, et cetera. But I do think, personally in my own life, I try to consume things in a way that contribute to the society I want to see, which is like fair and equitable pay, safety for your workers, and that hasn't always been an industry standard. And so I like to think about the power imbalances that exist in society and how they can be reinforced by my consumption or not. And that when we say ethical consumption, that's what we're talking about, right? And that like sounds really academic, but all it means is like think about your position within this larger system.
So Shane, I'm hearing you talking a little bit about like in your personal life navigating boundaries with porn and like figuring out what feels good, and hearing you talk about like ethics and morals and navigating that, and it sounds like the language that we use when we talk to people about hooking up and consent. And so I'm wondering, like, if consent is a tenet of a healthy sex life, like,
Mhm.
are there depictions of that in porn?
Interesting question. Do some extensive research for this.
Strokes, mustache.
And yeah, it's like kind of hard to find examples of consent in porn, and like it's
You mean like watching someone ask for consent in porn?
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
yeah.
Like
It's,
models of it, yeah.
I'll get to it. Hey, let me speak. It's like there's like no search terms, right, for like consent in porn. You don't like to type in sexy consent, right? And so like you kind of find like examples of consent in porn of like someone being like, oh, do this, right? Or you like that, don't you? But like it's never really a question, right? And we never really hear the other person be like, oh no, I don't like that. Like actually, can we do this instead? And we don't really see like the beginning of it. It just kind of like cuts right to the action.
Yeah.
And which is something that we as speak about it like is missing. We think is missing from the conversation.
Well, I think the flip side of that too is that, especially when we're paying for porn, when they're actors who are practicing, like they have pre-negotiate consent beforehand, and they talk about their boundaries and what they're comfortable doing and not doing, and then of course it's edited.
Right.
So we're not going to see the like ouch ouch around my hair moments because it's edited. And I think we can all, there needs to be more conversation about making sure that the actors are taken care of, that there is consent, that it's equitable. And then I don't think it would be the end of the world for us to see, us the consumers, see people asking for consent, see people negotiating their boundaries. It might not be like the sexiest part of porn, but I don't know, I think I get turned on a little bit more when I know that people are being totally disrespected and taken advantage of.
Right. I think that's why amateur porn is sometimes like really popular, is because people like kind of want to see what it's like in real life. Obviously, amateur porn is problematic in many ways, and like we can talk about that. But like, I think I hear you sort of like calling for like some more realness in hookups in porn.
Well, and even
Yeah.
recreating, like, if we had some of the scripts that professionals do use to negotiate their own boundaries that happens behind the scenes, that's also immensely helpful as we move forward. Because one of the things we talk about in consent is we don't have a lot of scripts for it. So if you had professionals literally negotiating, like, what actions are cool, what parts of my body are great, what do I want you to call them, then we would all be set up so much better when we're in the understanding porn is fantasy and not reality. When we move into the reality of sex, we would be set up so much better.
Which I think like does, because like hearing that is like, wow, that sounds like a bummer, right? But like I don't think that has to be a bummer, right? Like, there's ways to talk about what you want done to you and what you want to do to someone that's sexy. And these are people that are professionally sexy, right? And so like I think that like porn can actually be a really great place to like model consent and show people like, wow, this is how you talk about what you want someone to do to your body, and this is how you get it damn hot.
Yeah.
For sure. Feels like a field of opportunity.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, which makes me like excited for that.
Ooh.
So it feels like we're connecting like porn a little bit back to real relationships. So a question about porn and real relationships. Does porn consumption or the porn you watch affect relationships? And how do you talk about porn within your relationships?
Yeah, I think porn is super divisive. Some people love it, some people hate it. And I think there are two components here. One is like a personal relationship with porn. So if someone is partnered and they're watching porn, like they have their own relationship with porn, and then how porn plays into the relationship dynamics. Are you watching it together? Are you talking about the different types of porn that you're looking at? Are you saying, like, hey, I saw this thing in a video, do you want to try it? How do you feel about that? I think obviously overindulgence in anything is not a great idea, but I think porn can be a great, certainly conversation starter with your partner to talk about things you like, and I think it helps make our own pleasure a little bit more accessible.
Yeah.
I also think that it's important to point out that like, so porn can help to like augment, to like enhance your relationship with a partner or partners, but like it can also just be enjoyed by yourself, right? Like there's something to be said for like having like that moment with yourself, that moment of intimacy with yourself, and kind of getting lost in fantasy. That can be really great. But I think that being said, like acknowledging again that like this is fantasy and like looking at, all right, cool, like what happened in that moment, right? I was turned on by this in a way that like I normally don't think about, and like cool, like what happened and why? Because that's something I like. And realizing that like it's like fantasy and the real world are like two different places.
Any other tips or tricks for talking to your partners about porn before we ask another question?
I mean, I think it's the same rules as talking to your partner about anything else, right? Like honesty, openness, make sure you're doing it in a way that feels safe to you, and make space for their beliefs and opinions, right? Like we say don't yuck someone's yum, and we don't often think about that with porn, but like your partner or partners might want to watch something that doesn't resonate with you, and that doesn't mean they necessarily want to do it with you. So like assuming their own best intentions and making space to talk about it with honesty feels important.
And I think, not only not yucking someone's yum, but like not shaming someone for
Yeah.
watching porn. So like
Yeah.
if you're on your partner's phone and you open it up and you see there's, you know, whatever interesting porn they might be into, not be like, oh, what the fuck are we watching? Like, that's so gross. You know, letting people have their, especially if it's with themselves and exploring that part of that relationship, I think being able to have open conversations about what we're doing in our own time is really valuable and also really difficult, but really valuable.
Yeah.
And I think that like, so I just have two things I want to say.
No,
They're
go for it.
like a little connected. I think that one time, like there's times that people feel almost offended or like there's like a competition against porn with their partner, right? And they're watching porn and masturbating, and I'm not doing my job, right? And it's like, no, like that might be something entirely outside of
I
you,
have
right?
Yeah.
4 minutes.
Yeah, I got 4 minutes. I'm like in like home for lunch. Like I gotta do this. And so like realizing that like it is not necessarily indicative of like a problem in your relationship if your partner is watching porn, right? So first thing, and then second thing, if your partner's watching porn and then like finding it hard to be like aroused with you, but like you like might find that to be a problem, and it's like maybe switch up your porn routine, right? Like if you find that you're like falling in the same habits, like maybe you need to switch up what you're doing, like what you're looking at. Maybe you need to take a little break. Like there's some experts that say that like that you can get like kind of oversaturated with porn. Like you do need to take a little break. So just thinking about those things and like keeping it in mind that like there are those ways that it does affect the couple.
Well, of course, if you're choosing to watch porn over like hanging out with human beings, that's where we start to think about boundaries a little bit. How much is too much?
Yeah. I think those are all really important things to like think about when you're establishing a healthy relationship and then a healthy relationship with porn and another person.
Can I jump the gun and like sort of switch it up a little bit?
Yeah, go for it.
It also, I think the porn we consume does impact our fantasies. Like,
Yeah.
it's not, we don't just seek out the fantasies we know we have, it also can impact, like, it works two ways. It's a relationship we have with porn. So it's also important to sort of think critically sometimes when you're with your partner or partners, like, am I watching porn that doesn't have the type of body that I'm, like, currently having sex with in it? And, like, what does that mean? And how do I seek out more of that? And nobody can tell you right or wrong to those answers, but, like, porn shows, there are a lot of folks making what I would call feminist porn, and they often assert as feminist porn that does include a wider range of like bodies and experiences and abilities, etc. But that doesn't exist if you're just doing a quick search or looking at stuff you can get for free or cheap necessarily. So like thinking about the impact that has on like your own attraction in a way that can impact relationships.
I think it's a really fair point. And speaking about like fantasies,
Totally jumped in, sorry.
no, I think a fantasy that a lot of people have and sometimes fulfill is making your own porn. And so this isn't an endorsement for that, but Dan Savage, some people know, talk about how like we all could be porn stars. We've got this camera in our pocket, and so it happens. What are the rules around that? What are the boundaries around DIY porn?
It almost feels like it's really similar to like the boundaries in sexting, and it's like watch our video on sexting. But like yeah, it feels like it's similar to like to that, right? It's like having to because like there's just two pieces to it. One for yourself, you're gonna like, what is that's going on for me? Like, why is that sexy? Why is that a desire, right? Like, what, like, exhibitionist needs to be fulfilling or, like, voyeuristic or, like, do I just, like, think my face and body are great and want people to see? Like, it's like what part of this is really going on for me? And, you know, where it is that you're willing to go with it. Because I think, like, knowing why you're into it is, like, helpful in thinking about, like, what it is that you want to do. And then, so I think, then pulling your partner to actually, right, being like, is this something you're interested in? And, like, if you're interested in it, what about this is sexy to you? Like, are you just into it because I am? So, like, does that mean you don't want your face in it, right? Like, do you think that, like, we both look great, so you do want to be part of it, right? And so, like, having that, like, little bit of dialogue can be important. And it can also, again, like, be a good way of trying to figure out, like, fantasy, right? Like, you may, or, like, basically, like, kink. So you, like, may not have even realized that, like, oh, I love the idea of people watching this, right? And so, like, that might be something that you, like, now discovered, which is important for you to know. And so,
And it's also important to navigate the boundaries around like making consent and making a DIY sex tape or porn in the same way we would in any other way. I feel like I'm saying that all the time. I feel like that's my thesis of this podcast. It's like not just consenting to being filmed, but enthusiastically consenting to all the acts involved and negotiating the rules around like, where are we saving this? Who's keeping this file? Is this file getting shared? Where do we have full control over that? Like, what happens? Maybe we destroy it. Maybe one of us gets the right to destroy it, or like just thinking about like some of the stuff around once it leaves your like hot little hands, what happens with it, and making sure that it's an ongoing conversation that in the same way as all other sexual conversations is about like consent and safety and trust and respect.
Well, and I think especially when we talk about amateur porn, it may have been made consensually, but we don't know if it's being shared consensually.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And so just another thing to think about like where we're getting our porn from and how consent plays into this and what messages we're taking away.
Yeah, I think it's a really good caveat to the DIY porn thing. So we're almost at 20 minutes. I want to ask one last question.
Ooh.
To sort of tie this all together. We've like
Takeaways.
I'm
We
gonna
love
phrase the
takeaways.
takeaways in a specific way. But the takeaway I want is how do we, using all this information, critically watch porn and not take the fun out of it? If we like to watch porn in the first place.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
$40 million question. I think it's really interesting. I think sometimes about like how often we can give ourselves break time in other ways around like, I'm just not gonna like engage as a feminist in this interaction. Or like, I'm gonna watch this. I watch So You Think You Can Dance. I know, it's awful. It's the worst part about me.
So good.
But like, it's not, if anybody else loves it, great, we'll talk about it later. But
Comment below.
but like, it's a time, that hour, I need to turn off my feminist brain because like, it's not useful, but it brings me joy. And then I turn back on my brain at a later date and I've like negotiated with myself that that's okay. Also acknowledging that I have the privilege to do that, right? Like not everybody has that capacity or is given that capacity. So I think because porn can be really joyful, you can think about it in the same way, by which I mean like, absolutely, when you're consuming it, you don't need to be thinking about like what patriarchal structures came to this particular shot, right? You can just be enjoying what happens, and then afterwards remember to turn back on your brain and like also make sure that if you're consuming porn, it might also be valuable to read the voices of or like listen to the voices of the folks who make it. So once again, like encouraging you to go seek out like podcasts or resources or anything like that. Look on our blog later for the folks who like are involved in making porn.
Yeah, and also, so we reached out to a porn star, Connor Habib, who has some really awesome like articles and interviews and things. Like he's, I think, active still in the porn world, and so like he might be a good resource going to his website and reading some of the things that he's posted.
Yeah.
We love us some Tina Horn too.
Yeah.
Tina.
Yeah.
Of course, it's so deep for it, Tina. I think that my takeaway is actually a little related to that, right? It's like being truthful to yourself, right? And figure out that, like, if you're the type of person that, like, you can't shut your brain off, like, that's cool, right? Like, don't shut your brain off and, like, only watch porn that is, like, that fits into, like, the frame of values that's right for you. If you can't shut your brain off, that is important for you, then, like, watch and enjoy things and, like, think critically about, like, what is it that just happened, right? So, like, sex, right? Like, sex with a person, like after you finish, you, like, talk, like, wow, that was great, and, like, this was really cool, like, let's try this next time. And like masturbation, sex with yourself, right? Like have that same sense of pillow talk, right? And so like after it's over, like hot cell phone in your hand, and like ask like cool, like that this thing pushing me over the edge, and like why? I never thought about that before, and or like this is my old like trusty, like why do I always go back to this, right? Like and like really thinking about it, like obviously don't like ruin the moment for yourself, but after the fact, when you're like cleaning up. Think about it, right? And like ask yourself a question about why you're into it.
And that's not a thing you have to do alone. Like we talked a little bit about, like you may or may not have a group of friends or folks who like will talk about this with you, but the more we normalize conversations around this, we'll talk about it with you at any point. The more we normalize conversations about this, the more we can talk about like the industry, and the more we can like figure out what it means to be consuming porn in an ethical way. Like find your friend who wrote their thesis on porn and porn consumption. And like talk to them.
Yeah. Also, hi Eric, thank you for joining. Love you.
We're almost done. Sorry, Eric. So
I think I did write my senior term paper in college about First Amendment speech rights and porn consumption, and I did not. I got a B on it, so I did all right. I think that what we need from porn is a disclaimer before porn that says these are actors. This is not real life. This is rehearsed often, if we're paying for a porn. If we're gonna have such a disparity in sex education in this country, a lot of young people are turning to porn to teach them about sex education. This is not real sex. This is porn sex. And I'm always pro porn with that caveat. That we're understanding that we are watching actors who often are getting paid for this, and that this is not real life. We talked earlier about the editing and the lack of the script. So if you're going to consume porn, go ahead and do so. Understand that this is like watching a movie. This is not necessarily the way two people actually have sex. We've talked about penis size and hair and how that's different in porn than in real life. And then, of course, my second thing is just pay for your porn. If you're in a place where you can afford to pay for porn, I think you're going to get better quality porn, and you also know that you're supporting an industry that's trying to do it the right way.
Yeah, that feels like a perfect little button to end that on. Otherwise, we would talk about porn literally all day. We might continue to do so after we turn off the
we will.
camera.
Yeah.
Exactly.
For you folks who are watching, either now or later, we are going to be posting some follow-up resources for some of the stuff that Arande mentioned, as well as maybe some stuff from other writers if you want to learn more about ethical porn and porn consumption and healthy porn consumption. So check out our blog, speakaboutitonline.com/blog, and we will see you next month for another Hot Goss.
Yay, bye hot goslings. Love you guys.
You ready for your favorite part where I have to walk over and turn it off?
Oh,
I
so
am.
awkward.
I'm
So
Yes, it's so good.
awkward. Oh, you're so close.
I'm so close.